If you're drawn to real-life mysteries, dark secrets, and stories that keep you up at night, you're in the right place. We uncover the chilling truths behind the world's most disturbing crimes. No faces, no fluff, just facts, fear, and unforgettable twists. Like what you hear? Smash the like button. Want more gripping stories? Hit that subscribe button. Don't miss a single case, turn on notifications and stay ahead of the truth. This isn't just crime. This is the dark side of human nature, exposed. On the morning of November 21, 2022, Milwaukee was just beginning to stir. The crisp Wisconsin air carried the scent of damp leaves, as the last traces of autumn clung to the branches. School buses rumbled through neighborhoods, headlights cutting through the early fog. The city was alive, yet peaceful, with the ordinary rhythm of a weekday. Inside one quiet home on the northwest side of Milwaukee, Quiana Mann was starting her day. At 44 years old, she had long mastered the art of balancing her responsibilities, raising children, keeping a household, and carving out time for herself when she could. Friends described her as warm, patient, and dependable, a woman who put her family first, even when life tested her strength. Quiana was the kind of mother who never stopped trying. She had 2 children she loved fiercely, a teenage daughter who was thoughtful and grounded, and a younger son, just 9 years old, who was more difficult to handle. The daughter was her steady support, often helping out at home, while the boy, he was complicated. At first glance, he looked like any child, small, curious, full of energy. But behind those eyes, Quiana sensed something else. He could be charming when he wanted to be, but his moods shifted quickly. When he didn't get what he wanted, his temper flared. Sometimes it was just sulking. Other times, it was explosive. Like many modern children, he spent hours with screens, tablets, computers, video games. Quiana worried about how much time he spent online, but she also knew it was the world kids were growing up in. She tried to set limits. She tried to say no. But each time she did, she saw how deep his obsession really ran. In the weeks leading up to that November morning, her son had become fixated on one thing, a virtual reality headset. He talked about it endlessly, dropping hints at dinner, bringing it up in the car, even pleading late into the evening when Quiana was exhausted from work. At first, she dismissed it as the usual childhood begging. But the more he pushed, the more concerned she became. This wasn't just about wanting a toy. This was about needing it. He watched videos about VR constantly, eyes glued to glowing screens that promised adventure and escape. Commercials painted the headset as a gateway to another world, colorful, exciting, limitless. And for a boy already struggling with self-control, that promise was intoxicating. To him, it wasn't just entertainment. It was a way out. A way to step away from the real world, with its rules and restrictions, and into a place where he had power. But Quiana stood firm. She wasn't a mother who gave in easily. She believed in responsibility, in teaching her children the value of patience and discipline. She knew that giving in to every demand wouldn't help him, it would only teach him to expect the world to bend at his will. So, she told him no. And then she told him no again. And with every rejection, something inside the boy hardened. Neighbors later said they rarely noticed much noise from the Mann household. It wasn't the kind of home where screaming fights spilled out into the yard. Quiana wasn't loud. She wasn't dramatic. But behind closed doors, the tension was rising. Her teenage daughter confided that her brother's attitude was growing darker. He snapped more quickly, argued more fiercely, and sometimes looked at their mother with a coldness that felt out of place for a child. Quiana tried to brush it off. "He's just strong-willed," she would say. "He'll grow out of it." But even she could feel it, the heaviness in the air, the unease that crept into the corners of their home. On that final morning, the air inside the Mann home was quiet, too quiet. Quiana moved through her routines, checking the time, reminding her son to get ready for school. She didn't notice the way he watched her, the way his small hands twitched with restless energy. He was polite enough on the surface. He said little. But inside, his mind was racing. The headset still consumed his thoughts. He couldn't let go of it. He couldn't let go of the word that had echoed in his head again and again. No. No headset. No escape. No control. It was more than a refusal. To him, it was rejection. It was betrayal. And that morning, in the quiet of their Milwaukee home, a decision began to take root in his young mind. Quiana had no way of knowing that this would be the last morning she would ever spend in her home. To her, it was just another day. But to him, it was the beginning of the end. In 2022, virtual reality was no longer just a niche interest. It had entered the mainstream, flooding advertisements, social media, and the imaginations of millions of children. To many kids, a VR headset wasn't just another gadget, it was the most exciting window into another world. A world where you didn't have to sit in your bedroom staring at four walls. A world where you weren't bound by school rules, chores, or a mother's voice saying no. A world where you could be a hero, a warrior, an explorer, anything but yourself. For a 9-year-old boy in Milwaukee, this allure became intoxicating. At first, it was harmless. He watched videos online, fascinated by people exploring digital landscapes. He clicked through ads, memorizing every detail about the newest headset. He told his sister about it, he asked his mother about it, he even dreamed about it. But as the days passed, it wasn't fascination anymore. It was fixation. Psychologists say that children often develop phases of obsession, whether it's dinosaurs, superheroes, or a favorite TV show. But those obsessions, while intense, usually fade with time. This was different. The boy's fixation didn't fade, it deepened. Each passing day seemed to revolve around the headset he didn't have. He watched videos for hours, his small face illuminated by the blue glow of the screen. He replayed commercials again and again, his imagination feeding on every promise of escape. And when Quiana told him no, his anger didn't pass. Instead, it hardened into something cold. He became resentful. Silent at times, brooding at others. His sister noticed the change. He stopped playing outside. He stopped joking with her. He withdrew further into himself, deeper into the world he wanted but couldn't have. The headset had become more than a toy. It was his symbol of freedom. His definition of happiness. His way out of a life he felt trapped in. And because his mother stood in the way, she became, in his young mind, the villain of his story. Quiana believed firmly in discipline. She knew how dangerous it was to give in to every demand, especially when her son's temper was so quick. She wanted to raise him to understand boundaries, to respect rules, and to value patience. So, when he begged for the headset, she said no. And then she said no again. Each time with the same firm tone, each time believing she was teaching him a lesson. But to him, no was not guidance. It wasn't structure. It was rejection. It was betrayal. The simple word, no, carried more weight than Quiana could have realized. It didn't teach him patience. Instead, it fueled his anger. It carved into him like a wound that refused to heal. And slowly, silently, it began to reshape how he saw his own mother. It wasn't just commercials that drove his obsession. The internet played its part too. Videos online showcased kids unboxing VR headsets, their faces lighting up with joy. Gaming channels flaunted the endless adventures inside the digital worlds. Influencers glamorized it, turning the headset into a symbol of status and happiness. For a young boy with little emotional control, it was a dangerous cocktail, endless exposure to something he desperately wanted but could not have. Every time he saw another child with the headset, another video of someone living the life he wanted, the resentment inside him grew. Why did they get to have it? Why did his mother keep him from it? The digital world promised freedom. The real world, in his eyes, was prison. Quiana confided to friends that her son's behavior had become more challenging. She noticed his temper, his obsession, but she thought he would outgrow it. She didn't see the storm building beneath the surface. He wasn't just asking anymore. He was plotting. His desire for escape wasn't just about games. It was about power. In his young mind, the headset represented control, control he didn't have in the real world. And every time his mother said no, she became the barrier standing between him and the life he thought he deserved. In hindsight, the signs were there. The obsession. The growing anger. The inability to accept rejection. But no one, not Quiana, not her daughter, not the neighbors, could have imagined how far he would take it. This wasn't a teenager with years of built-up resentment. This wasn't an adult who had grown callous over time. This was a boy in elementary school. A child who should have been thinking about cartoons and playgrounds, not life and death. And yet, his mind was already walking a path most adults could never comprehend. The headset was no longer just an object of desire. It had become an obsession. An obsession strong enough to kill four. The Mann household was not loud or chaotic. From the outside, it looked like any other home on the block, a modest Milwaukee house with a trimmed lawn and blinds pulled neatly across the windows. Neighbors rarely heard shouting. They rarely saw drama spill outside. But inside, a quiet tension had been brewing for weeks. The boy's obsession with the VR headset had reached a boiling point. Every day, he brought it up again, his small voice growing sharper, more insistent. And every day, Quiana's answer was the same. No. She said it gently at first. Then firmly. And finally, with frustration creeping into her voice. Each time she refused, the air inside the house grew heavier. On one particular evening, just days before the tragedy, the argument reached its peak. The boy sat at the dining room table, his arms crossed, staring at the tablecloth. His mother sat across from him, trying to reason, trying to explain. "You don't need it," she told him. "You have plenty already. You need to focus on school. On being responsible." Her voice was steady, but there was exhaustion underneath. She had said these words before. She would say them again. But this time, the silence that followed felt different. He didn't argue back in that moment. He didn't throw a tantrum like a typical child might. He sat still. Too still. His silence wasn't submission. It was calculation. For a 9-year-old, the concept of no can feel overwhelming. Most children eventually get over it. They pout, they sulk, they cry. But then they move on. This boy, however, could not. His mind processed no differently. To him, it wasn't a simple rejection of a request. It was a betrayal of his happiness, an act of cruelty from the one person who was supposed to give him everything. In his world, no was the ultimate insult. The denial didn't just wound him, it transformed his view of his mother. No longer the protector. No longer the giver. But the obstacle. Quiana tried to soften her stance. She wasn't cruel, she was trying to teach. She explained that money was tight, that he already had things to play with, that life wasn't about getting everything you wanted instantly. She hoped her words would reach him. She hoped he would understand. But he didn't. In his young mind, he wasn't hearing wisdom. He was hearing excuses. The gulf between them widened that night. One thought she was guiding. The other thought he was being denied his very right to happiness. And somewhere in that gulf, a dangerous seed took root. That night, after the argument, the house fell into uneasy silence. Quiana went about her routine, tidying up, preparing for the next day. She sighed heavily, not realizing that her son's silence was not acceptance. He sat in his room, door closed, the glow of his tablet reflecting off his face. He scrolled through VR videos once more. He imagined himself in those worlds, free and powerful. And each time his imagination soared, the crash back into reality felt sharper. And then he remembered her face at the table. The firmness in her voice. The way she told him no as if she had the final say. Something inside him snapped. Psychologists often say that the scariest thing about certain children isn't when they scream and cry, it's when they go quiet. The absence of emotion. The cold stillness. That night, he didn't cry. He didn't argue. He didn't beg anymore. He went quiet. But in his silence, something darker was forming. He began to view his mother not as his guardian, but as an enemy. An obstacle. And in his mind, obstacles weren't to be endured, they were to be removed. His older sister noticed the shift. She would later testify that her brother seemed different after that argument. Colder. More detached. He spoke less. When he did speak, it was short, blunt, sometimes unnervingly flat. She tried to brush it off at first. After all, he was just a child. But something about the way he looked at their mother unsettled her. There was no love in his eyes anymore. Only resentment. In that quiet storm of resentment, the boy made a decision. No more asking. No more begging. No more waiting. If his mother refused to give him what he wanted, then she had no place in his world anymore. Looking back, the argument may have seemed like any other battle between parent and child. A mother saying no. A child sulking in anger. But this was not an ordinary child. And this was not an ordinary sulk. What Quiana thought was an act of discipline was, to her son, an act of war. And in his young mind, there was only one way to win. The argument didn't end with words. It was the beginning of murder. The night of November 21, 2022, began like any other. Quiana Mann prepared for bed, unaware that her home was no longer safe, not from the outside world, but from within. Her teenage daughter had already retreated to her room, scrolling through her phone before drifting off. The house was quiet, still. But behind one closed door, her youngest child sat awake, wide-eyed in the dark. In his small hands, he turned the thought over and over. The argument. The no, the endless craving for the headset. And then came the decision. At some point in the night, the boy slipped from his room and made his way down the hall. His footsteps were soft, but his intent was heavy. He knew where the object of power was, tucked away, hidden, but not well enough. A gun. It wasn't his toy guns. It wasn't the plastic props he had grown out of. This was real. Cold metal. A weapon he had no business knowing how to hold, yet somehow, he did. Psychologists would later debate whether he understood the finality of death. Whether, at 9 years old, he could fully grasp what it meant to pull a trigger. But what mattered in that moment was not comprehension. It was intent. And he intended to use it. Quiana was either preparing for her day ahead or moving through the house when her son confronted her. The details that followed horrified even the most seasoned detectives. The boy pointed the gun at his mother, the woman who carried him, who raised him, who said no when she believed she was teaching him love. And with one simple, devastating motion, he squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed through the house, shattering more than silence. It shattered a family. It shattered a future. For a moment, there was nothing. No more arguing. No more pleading. Just silence, heavy and terrifying. His sister, startled by the sound, rushed from her room. She found the unimaginable, her mother lying still, blood pooling beneath her. And standing nearby was her brother, clutching the weapon. Quiana Mann was dead. Not from an accident. Not from a stranger. But by the hand of her own 9-year-old son. The 911 call that night carried a tone of disbelief. The words were fragmented, panicked, almost impossible to process. A mother shot. A child with a gun. When police arrived at the Mann home, the scene stunned even them. Inside the modest suburban house lay Quiana Mann, unresponsive, fatally wounded. And standing amidst the chaos was the shooter, a boy so young that the uniformed officers hesitated for a moment, unable to reconcile what they were seeing. What does it mean to arrest a 9-year-old? Officers gently but firmly took him into custody. His small wrists dwarfed by the handcuffs. His expression, not one of panic, not one of guilt, but eerily flat. He admitted what he had done. Not with shame. Not with tears. But almost casually, as though explaining why he hadn't done his homework. The officers exchanged glances. They had dealt with hardened criminals. They had dealt with violent teens. But never something like this. The teenage daughter was left broken, traumatized by what she had witnessed. Overnight, she had lost her mother and her brother, one dead, the other in custody for murder. Extended family rushed in, torn between grief and disbelief. How could a 9-year-old do this? How could anyone? Quiana Mann's life ended in seconds. Her daughter's innocence ended in the same moment. And the boy who thought a headset was worth everything, had crossed a line he could never return from. The story spread quickly. Headlines blared across Milwaukee, 9-year-old boy charged with shooting mother. Neighbors gathered in stunned silence. Some wept. Others whispered, trying to understand. A child barely older than a third grader, accused of murder. The community had seen crime before. But not like this. Not from someone so young. When the case reached court, it drew national attention. How do you prosecute a 9-year-old? What does justice look like when the accused is still in elementary school? The prosecution faced a dilemma. On one hand, the act was undeniably murder. On the other, the perpetrator was a child too young to legally comprehend contracts, driving, or voting. And yet, here he was, standing accused of killing his own mother in cold blood. In court, details emerged that stunned everyone. After shooting his mother, the boy reportedly used her credit card to order the VR headset online. Hours after pulling the trigger, he logged on to his accounts as if nothing had happened. The courtroom gasped when prosecutors revealed this. It wasn't just a crime of passion. It was premeditation. His older sister gave heartbreaking testimony. She described how he had become colder in the weeks before the shooting. How he seemed different. And how, after their mother's death, he showed no remorse. Her words cracked as she spoke. She was a teenager carrying the weight of a family shattered in one night. The boy sat quietly throughout much of the proceedings. Not restless like a child. Not frightened like a defendant. Just still. Attorneys, journalists, even the judge commented on the unnerving calm he projected. It wasn't innocence. It wasn't fear. It was something else, something darker. As the trial unfolded, America watched closely. Was this a child who didn't understand what he had done? Or was this proof that even innocence can harbor darkness? The gavel slammed. The proceedings continued. But one thing was certain, the courtroom had become a stage for one of the most disturbing questions of our time. When most people think of evil, they imagine hardened criminals, shadowy figures lurking in alleys, or faces twisted by years of hate. Rarely does anyone imagine a child, a 9-year-old, barely tall enough to see over a courtroom bench. And yet, here was a boy who had pulled a trigger against his own mother. This case forced America to confront a disturbing question: can evil exist in innocence? Psychologists rushed to weigh in. At age 9, a child's brain is still developing. Impulse control is limited. Emotions run high. They may not fully understand consequences, like the permanence of death. But the details of this case made it different. The boy didn't act out in a tantrum. He didn't cry in regret. He plotted. He retrieved a gun. He used it. Then, in chilling calm, he ordered the VR headset online using his dead mother's credit card. That wasn't childish confusion. That was calculation. Experts described his behavior as showing callous unemotional traits, an early marker of what, in adults, is often labeled psychopathy. These traits include lack of remorse or guilt, shallow emotions, manipulativeness, obsession with control or power, When his sister testified that he showed no sadness after their mother's death, it only deepened the fear. Could a 9-year-old truly lack empathy? Could he really have no sense of guilt? Most children who misbehave do so because of immaturity. They push boundaries but eventually learn. But some cases, like this one, suggest something darker at play. A potential for violence that emerges shockingly early. Courts and psychologists wrestled with the same dilemma. Was this boy simply too young to understand, or was he showing the early signs of something profoundly dangerous? The truth, chillingly, may be both. A child too young to vote. Too young to drive. But old enough to kill. For Quiana's teenage daughter, life changed forever in a single night. One moment, she was a teenager scrolling through her phone in her bedroom. The next, she was rushing into the hallway after hearing a gunshot, only to find her mother lying lifeless. The trauma of that moment would haunt her forever. She had lost her mother. And at the same time, she had lost her brother, not to death, but to prison walls and courtroom hearings. Quiana was remembered by family and friends as gentle, patient, and endlessly giving. She worked hard, raised her children with care, and stood her ground when necessary. Her murder left not only an emotional void but also a practical one. She had been the provider, the caregiver, the anchor. With her gone, everything collapsed. Relatives struggled to reconcile what had happened. How could their nephew, cousin, grandson, a child they had held as a baby, commit such an act? Some refused to believe it. Others, through tears, admitted they had seen troubling signs in his behavior before. But none could have imagined it would come to this. Family torn apart. Community shaken. A young girl left with scars no therapy could ever fully erase. And at the center of it all, a boy who seemed untouched by guilt, watching it all unfold with chilling calm. Technology has always been a double-edged sword. For children, it can be entertainment, education, even connection. But it can also be obsession. The boy at the center of this tragedy lived much of his young life in front of screens. Tablets, computers, games. The headset was just the next step, the ultimate escape. Online, he was bombarded with videos glamorizing VR. Kids unboxing new headsets. Influencers raving about the immersive experiences. Advertisements promising adventure, excitement, happiness. To a child who struggled with impulse control, it was irresistible. Every video, every ad whispered the same message: you need this. You're incomplete without it. For him, the headset wasn't just about fun. It was a way out. Out of discipline. Out of rules. Out of the no, his mother kept repeating. Virtual reality promised a world where he wasn't just a child being told what he couldn't do. It promised a world where he was in control. In the end, it wasn't just a headset that drove him. It was what it symbolized. Power. Escape. Control. The internet had sold him a dream. His mother had denied it. And in his young, distorted logic, there was only one way to remove the obstacle. This tragedy became a wake-up call about children, technology, and obsession. About how easily digital dreams can turn toxic. And about how sometimes, the cost of just a toy can be unthinkably high. There are crimes we expect to hear about in the evening news: robberies, assaults, even murders committed in the heat of passion. But a 9-year-old boy shooting his mother because she refused to buy him a VR headset? That isn't a story anyone was prepared to process. The nation read the headlines with disbelief. Parents clutched their children a little tighter. Teachers stared at their classrooms, wondering if they truly understood the kids sitting before them. And psychologists struggled with the same terrifying thought: if innocence can kill, what does that say about the world we're building? Quiana Mann tried to do what parents across the country do every day: set boundaries. She said no to something she believed her son didn't need. She tried to teach him discipline, patience, responsibility. But in her refusal, something darker was triggered. Control is fragile. Parents control the world of young children, shaping what they can and cannot do. But technology, advertisements, and the internet chipped away at that control. For the boy, the headset wasn't just a toy. It was a promise. A world in which he was the master. And when his mother stood in the way, he saw her not as a guide, but as the barrier. The tragedy didn't end with a single gunshot. It radiated outward like cracks in glass. A sister left traumatized, living with images she can never unsee. A family ripped apart, trying to grieve while grappling with the reality that the killer is also one of their own. A community shaken, struggling to explain to their children how someone their age could do something so unthinkable. Quiana's death was not just the loss of a mother. It was the loss of trust, innocence, and stability for everyone around her. We often celebrate technology. We marvel at how it connects us, entertains us, and even educates us. But this case revealed its darker side: the way it can twist desires, fuel obsession, and blur reality. For the boy, technology didn't just entertain him. It consumed him. It shaped his thoughts, his dreams, his sense of entitlement. It whispered promises of freedom, of control, of escape, promises his mother refused to fulfill. The internet never taught him patience. It never taught him that happiness isn't bought, that disappointment is part of life. Instead, it taught him to crave, to demand, to expect. In the courtroom, the boy's demeanor chilled everyone. No tears. No regret. No fear. Just silence. His lack of remorse left a haunting question: was this simply the immaturity of a child who couldn't grasp the consequences? Or was it something darker, an early glimpse of a mind wired without empathy? The gavel slammed. Proceedings moved forward. But no verdict, no sentence, no courtroom argument could undo the horror of that night. We want to believe in the innocence of children. We want to think they are blank slates, pure and uncorrupted. But this story forces us to confront an unsettling reality: innocence is not guaranteed. Sometimes, even children can harbor darkness. Sometimes, the things they desire can twist into something deadly. The boy was not born evil. But his obsession, his inability to accept no, and the easy access to a weapon created a recipe for tragedy. And the result was the death of the one person who loved him most. What can we take from this tragedy? Parental boundaries are not enough. In a world where technology floods every corner, a parent's no can feel powerless against the tide of advertisements, influencers, and digital peer pressure. Access to weapons is fatal: a locked drawer, a misplaced gun, one moment of opportunity, and the unthinkable becomes reality. Child psychology is complex. Not all children react the same way to rejection. For some, it sparks growth. For others, it sparks rage. And perhaps the most haunting lesson: sometimes, there are no signs until it is too late. In the end, this case wasn't about a VR headset. It wasn't about a gadget or a game. It was about obsession. About the fragility of human control. About how easily love can be destroyed by anger. Quiana Mann's story reminds us that tragedy can come from places we least expect, not from strangers, not from the shadows outside, but from within our own homes. It asks us to look closer at our children, at the technologies they consume, and at the silent storms that might be building behind their eyes. And it leaves us with one final, haunting question. If a 9-year-old can kill over something as small as a headset, what does that mean for the future of a generation raised in virtual worlds? In the end, this was never just about a headset. It was about obsession, control, and the terrifying truth that sometimes, the darkest crimes don't come from strangers, but from those we least expect. Quiana Mann's story is a reminder that love, discipline, and boundaries are fragile, and when they collide with unchecked desire, the results can be devastating. Her life should be remembered for her strength as a mother, not the way it ended. But her death forces us to confront a chilling question: if a child can kill over something so small, what does that mean for the future of a generation raised in virtual worlds? This case is one of the most shocking we've ever covered: a 9-year-old killing his mother over a VR headset. We want to hear your thoughts. Do you believe this was simply a child who didn't understand consequences? Or do you think this revealed something much darker inside him? Drop your opinion below, let's talk about it. We'll be reading and responding to the most thoughtful comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story if it shook you as much as it did us.